Hello, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Couch GMs podcast. It is Tuesday, September 21st, 2021. And I am here. I'm your host, George Kerth, here with the two other stooges. We got Tyler Snyder in the house. Tyler, what's up?
How's it going? Coming off a victory this week from the Titans, so I'm in a good mood. I'm ready to go.
Good to hear. Good to hear. And we got Cody Roadcap. Cody, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How about them Packers? Bounce back, huge win, destroyed the Detroit Lions. Man, my heart is singing.
Disclaimer. We are recording this on Monday night before Monday Night Football, so he's just hoping and praying he's right, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's hurry up and get this done before the game starts.
Well, why don't we tell the people what to expect here first? We are going to recap the top stories of the week, which include a lot of injuries. We're going to give you a look at some week 3 waivers to help your team for next week and beyond. And we're going to play a little buy, sell, hold here for you guys to see what you should do for some players that are on free agency and maybe even on your roster. But let's jump in and get right into some NFL news.
All right, George, I'll start it off. It was a defensive kind of week this week. We had 4 fantasy defenses score 20-plus points this week. That's crazy.
I don't know if I've ever heard that in a fantasy week before. There's always 1 or 2 usually, but not 4.
Yeah, in our one league, none of us, but another matchup was going on, and both teams had a 20-point defense, and I felt so bad for them because normally, a 20-point defense, you feel like you got the upper hand, and the other guy, they just casually put up 20 points too. Crazy weeks for defenses, and there was, I think, even 5 more in double digits. For an offensive league, the defenses definitely showed up in week 2.
And Cody, you know what? I got to throw out a little bit of a story here. Speaking of massive points being put up and feeling bad for people, my girlfriend had a league where she had Derrick Henry putting up over 46 points in a half-point PPR this week and lost. She only put up 80 points with Aaron Rodgers left, and she is going to lose because Derrick Henry is the only person on her entire roster to break double digits this week. So 46, and she's going to lose. It's pretty sad.
It doesn't happen often, but I feel like there was a playoff game in our league of record at one point where you faced that Thursday night 200-yard, 5 stiff arm, 90-yard touchdown Derrick Henry and actually won that game too. So heartbreak happens to the best of us, but that's a really bad luck.
And shout out to Shelby since Tyler did also beat her in fantasy football. I know that's a tough one. He's probably not doing well. But a guy that is doing well is Will Fuller. He's back from his suspension, and now he's back again from his personal issue that he had to take care of. The Dolphins, we're going to talk about it in a little bit, had some injury scares with Tua, but they're getting their number 1 receiver back, their offseason acquisition. Are you guys instantly putting him in your starting lineups? What are your thoughts on Will Fuller?
Listen, Will Fuller is actually not owned a lot of places, and where he is owned, I don't think anybody's throwing him right into the lineup, especially after watching the Dolphins lose 35-0 this past week, and you don't even know who the quarterback's going to be this upcoming week. So at this point, I would say no, I'm not throwing him into my starting lineup. However, look, Tua's not playing with Desean Watson anymore. He doesn't have that same great quarterback that made him great in the past, but he still has that wicked speed that can break a game open at any moment. And we've seen guys like Tyreek Hill. We've seen guys like Henry Ruggs more recently. We've seen those guys that have the crazy speed that can put up huge points for your team and change the game for you. And when Will Fuller is on the field and he's healthy, he usually is a game changer. So definitely, if you can go get him, go grab him, stash him. But I would hold him on your bench until you see what the Dolphins are going to do on offense.
Agree. I think I want to spin this back to what about Jalen Waddle here as well? Like, he had a really good week 1, and some people did sneak him into starting lineups week 2 because they're like, oh, the rookie's got some fire. He's going to be really good. And not only did he have a very meh week 2, but now he's going to be the number 2/3 receiver with Will Fuller back. It could be a good thing. He could see a little less coverage shaded his way because someone like Will Fuller demands a safety over the top. But you won't know until you see a week or 2 with him in that system. But I think just if you're a Jalen Waddle owner, temper those expectations like you had at the beginning of the season. Don't keep Jonah rush him into your lineup right away. But I think he's going to come around sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not running to get Will Fuller into my starting lineups, I kind of compare him to his former teammate Brandon Cooks. Like, he's not a name that like I want to own in any fantasy football league, but he's going to consistently put up, 10 to 13 points most weeks once he's back fully healthy and acclimated into that offense. So he's definitely a sneaky guy for your flex options. But moving on to another team, I think we're just going to have a weekly segment for this team. Who's playing running back for the 49ers? They all got chances. They all almost lost their chances. It was a rough day for the 49er backfield. George, I know you had your eye closely on that game as an Eagles fan, but what did you see out of the 49ers running backs?
Elijah Mitchell started the game, looked awful. You saw JaMychal Hasty come into the game, looked effective, got hurt. Then you saw some Trenton Cannon in there. Mitchell came back in and ran for, I think he had 3 more carries. 1 was decent, 2 were for losses or no gain. They just look like a mess. They're bringing in running backs now to try out because of injuries. JaMychal Hasty, who was effective, is week to week, and he's definitely out week 3. I finally bought into the 49ers backfield after years. I've always been the person of, I don't care who it is, just because it's a hot hand. You could always have this guy end up coming out this game and you didn't expect it. I bought into Elijah Mitchell, and I'm done. I'm right back to, I'm not touching that backfield. I'm so frustrated, and everyone is still getting hurt, and I don't understand it.
Yeah, and you know what? They did have Trey Sermon there as well, which is the guy that we drafted a little bit higher, and he also got hurt and fumbled at one point, I believe. But out of the guys that they're bringing in, they're bringing
Concussion.
in. That's it. So they're bringing in Duke Johnson,
Mhm.
T.J. Yeldon, and Lamar Miller. I think out of these 3, Duke and Lamar have the best chance of making the team. Duke's your better guy in the passing game. Lamar's probably your better back on the ground. But I'm not even going to talk about these 3. And if one of them gets signed, should you go pick them up? Only if you really have a free spot. I still don't trust any of them. But this is now the second team that has been decimated with running back injuries. And Todd Gurley still has not gotten a call, not even a tryout. So is Todd Gurley done for good now? From my understanding, he still wants to play. And the other guy I want to mention is, what if we saw the return of the GOAT, Frank Gore? How cool would that be?
Well, I mean, if we're talking veteran running backs who have, we think about might come back, you have the Ravens signed almost all of them. And then the other group, that second tier group, is now trying out for the 49ers. You're literally just down to Todd Gurley. I feel like eventually there's got to be a team that wants a veteran fill in as a backup or whatever. And Todd Gurley has to get a call. I'd be in shock if he doesn't even get a tryout this season. So I think it's going to happen at some point. I would love to see Frank Gore come back, though, especially back to the 49ers. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, now I'm definitely rooting for that. For Frank Gore, get a reunion with the 49ers. That'd be fun. One last ride out in San Francisco. But I'm going to disagree with you on Todd Gurley. Like, I think he's done. Like, I think the league knows he's done. His knees are just decimated. I know last year at the beginning of the season, he scored all those touchdowns. So, like, fantasy players like us, we thought he was being productive. But when you, like, look back at the tape and you watch the games, his average was down. He wasn't consistent. He just found the end zone, and you saw the whole second half of the season. He was a guy that nobody wanted to play, even after a big first half. I think he's done. He was such an elite talent, but sometimes injuries just catch up with you, and he definitely aged faster because of those injuries. And unfortunately, I think we probably saw the last of Todd Gurley.
Well, let me just throw a counter argument at you really quick that Jay Ajayi had a very similar degenerative knee thing that Todd Gurley did, and people stayed away from him for a while, but he actually did end up coming back and having one more ride in the NFL. So I don't see why Gurley, who never even had to get the ACL surgery and everything else that Ajayi did, wouldn't get one more shot.
Well, Todd Gurley has had multiple ACL surgeries, and he was
Not
not
of
the
late.
workhorse. Yeah, but he was also not more of a workhorse than Jay Ajayi ever was. So he has, I'm just going to estimate here. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but probably twice the amount of carries as someone like Jay Ajayi. So he's definitely tread on those tires are worn out. But we should probably stop talking about players that aren't even on an NFL team and move on to what I thought might be the worst NFL team, but they won week 1. They gave the Browns everything they had and the Houston Texans. But Tyrod Taylor got hurt, and that was the end of their potential upset against the Browns. This time, thankfully, it was not done by the doctor. He did not get jabbed incorrectly, but it was an injury that put him out of the game, and it's a hamstring. He's going to miss time. And the coach came out today and said no change in Desean Watson. The dude's staying inactive. They're holding out for a trade with all his stuff going on. Davis Mills, 3rd-round pick, their first draft pick this year because they didn't have one until round 3. I mean, we were already avoiding this team so much. Like, does this even take Brandon Cooks out of the equation for you guys?
Yeah, I got to say it does. Honestly, the Texans were giving the Browns everything they had, and I run a NFL Survivor pool where you pick one team you think's going to win, and if you're wrong, you're out. And a lot of people picked the Browns this week, and a lot of people were shaken by midway through the game because Baker went down, so that made things a little interesting. But once Tyrod was on fire, and he was on fire week 1 too, and he's one of those guys you just kind of root for. But as soon as he went down, it was a whole different Texans offense. They weren't able to move the ball as well. Mills was making some mistakes. I don't think he's fully ready to play as a starter yet. So right now I'm avoiding the Texans personally. I don't even know if there's anybody out there that the Texans can go grab that can play. Maybe Tim Tebow can give it one more shot just to give the Texans some viewing. But other than that, yeah, give me no Texans at all this season.
It really hurts that Marcus Mariota got hurt in that first game for the Raiders because he's been waiting out for that starting quarterback job, and I think he would have been a great guy to fill in right there.
Oh, man, Mariota to a Titan rival. That would have sucked.
I know that'd be tough on you, but I think that would have been the best thing for Mariota's career at this point.
But do you think Houston's even looking for a guy? Like, they know this isn't their year. Like, are they going to really give up more assets to go get a guy? Even if it's like a 6th-round pick to go get Nick Foles. Like, are they going to do that? Like, why not just roll out with your 3rd-round pick?
Man, I feel like this is kind of the same situation as the NFC East last year because I don't want to compare AFC South to NFC East. I want to believe that the AFC South is not as bad as the NFC East was last year. But look, the Titans have struggled in the first 2 weeks. Yes, they won this week, but they struggled the whole game through. They have a really tough schedule. The Colts, even with healthy starters, they don't seem to be the team that we expected them to be. The Jaguars still aren't there yet. The Texans were playing well enough that they look like they could squeak out enough wins to actually make a run at this division, as much as I hate to say it. So do you want to go get a quarterback and try to sneak into the playoffs, even though you probably won't do anything once you're there? Or do you just give up this early and run with Davis Mills and, give up on this season? I don't know. It's a tough situation, really.
For me, I would roll with Davis Mills. You draft him in your 3rd round. Again, the first pick they had this year. And we know they're trading Desean Watson this offseason as long as his legal stuff gets settled. Like, you'll have this whole year to know if you want to proceed next year with all those draft picks not taking a quarterback, or hey, we still need our guy. It's not Davis Mills, isn't it? So I do like them rolling with Davis Mills. Man, why do I struggle so much to say simple names? I'll never.
You
I'll
want to say
never
David
understand
so
it.
bad.
I do.
Something about that name. You want to say David. But
Tyler
honestly,
Heineke, David Mills.
Before we move on, real quick, and we can even touch on this a little bit in a second once we get to the other quarterback injuries, but what about the other quarterback that's awaiting trade in Nick Foles? He is still out there as a number 3 quarterback. Yes, Andy Dalton got hurt. They said if he's healthy, he's still going to start. Justin Fields is the guy, but what if we even had a swap of Desean Watson and Nick Foles at this point? Because if both teams have an injured starting quarterback, now you at least have a new backup. Both teams need someone new anyway. So, I mean, that's another thing to look at. I don't know if the Texans would be willing to go make that move, especially for that contract, but we've seen crazier things in the NFL. But guys, we hinted at it enough. So let's go ahead and move on to the other quarterback injuries. We had Carson Wentz. I watched this one live, and his ankle got rolled up on pretty nasty.
It was
I'm really
gross.
surprised that his ankle's not shattered. the way that it twisted back, but they did say he has 2 sprained ankles and he is questionable. Baker Mayfield hurt his shoulder earlier in the game. His arm was dragging. It's on his non-throwing shoulder, so he seems to be okay. He should be able to play next week. Andy Dalton with a knee injury. He's questionable. Like I said earlier,
Another ugly injury.
The Bears did say if Andy Dalton is healthy, though, he will be the starter. If he's able to go, he will be the starter, not Justin Fields. Tua had a rib injury. He's questionable, so we might see some Jacoby Brissett starting in there. And finally, Derek Carr got injured after a super hot start. It was a real sad injury to see him go down at the time. Luckily, he was able to finish out the game. It is an ankle injury. He does hope to play this week, and I expect him to. But definitely not a guy you want to see go down, especially after Mariota did just hit the IR. So their backup quarterback is Nathan 5-pick Peterman. Not a situation you want to roll with. Guys, who do you think is the most notable of these quarterback injuries, though?
I'll start it off.
Yeah, go ahead.
Or
Cody.
you want to go, Jordan? No, I want to hear what you have to say. Okay.
I think the obvious is Andy Dalton. Because if he misses even a week or two and Justin Fields plays so well, how do you stick with Andy Dalton? I get how they're trying to ease Fields in, but if Fields comes in, gets him a win, throws for 300 yards, and runs for 100, how do you bench him?
Yeah. I mean, you really can at that point. But it's Matt Nagy, and he might. So we'll have to wait and see on him. I'm gonna pivot to a guy. Your guy is great for like fantasy advice. Like we all expect big things out of Justin Fields. Like Justin Fields is not that owned right now because he's a backup. So for fantasy players, you're probably hoping like this is Justin Fields' moment. But from an actual team standpoint, I'm gonna go with Carson Wentz. I know we said, even in this trade clause, it was about his injury. If he played so much, the Eagles get a first round pick. If he doesn't, but that game, they were off to a rough start, and he helped get that team back to the point where it was tied right before his injury. And literally, if he wouldn't have got hurt, I think the Colts would have won that game. And Jacob Eason comes in, and his first throw goes for a pick to Jalen Ramsey. So we all had high expectations for the Colts this year, especially after they competed so well with Phillip Rivers last year. To see Carson Wentz go out on that could have been his rallying game. That if he would have made that comeback, that could have been the momentum start that we need for Carson Wentz to snowball into, back to that his pre-injury with the Eagles year when, we thought this was like the next generational quarterback. Like he still has the talent. So for him to miss more time, hopefully it's not. I know he was trying to go. They were doing some warm-ups on the sideline, but that's probably a lot of adrenaline trying to get yourself back out there. Hopefully he doesn't end up on the IR and he doesn't miss too much time. But for the time being, as long as he's out, man, the Colts, that is a team that I had high expectations for. That without Carson Wentz, I'm not feeling him.
Yeah, Cody, I was actually going to agree with you. If you didn't say it, I was going to say Carson Wentz is the biggest injury for more than just the long term, but also the short term. I mean, like I said, that whole division right now is a mess. I would say that the Texans and the Jags are out. Like, just get rid of them from the conversation. So it's been a two-headed race all year, and that's what we expected between the Titans and the Colts. The Titans look like a mess right now. They have a lot of holes they got to fix if they want to make a deep run. And the Colts look like the most structurally sound. They just were missing a little bit of help there. And Carson Wentz really was that rallying factor. So if you're looking at just the short term, we have the Colts 0-2, the Titans are 1-1, and you have a huge matchup between the Titans and Colts in week 3. If you don't have Carson Wentz, I think their odds get a lot worse. I think the Titans' odds of winning this game get a lot higher. I think the Titans will end up pulling off the win. And if the Colts fall to 0-3, Titans move to 2-1, and they have that divisional and head-to-head win over the Colts, already your chances of making the playoffs look bleak. So I think this week 3 is a huge matchup early and a must-win for the Colts. So losing Carson Wentz, even if it's just for 1 week, could be devastating.
That's a great point, and calling a game must win in week 3 sounds crazy. But he laid it out for you why that could be. Moving on from the quarterbacks, they're the most important in the regular NFL, typically not in fantasy. So some fantasy guys are keeping your eye on. Daryl Henderson, he looked great again, but we've said it all offseason. The dude got hurt. It's a rib cartilage injury. They're hoping he's back. They're going to check him again on Friday. So definitely keep posted. Follow us on social media. We'll keep you updated on him. Deontay Johnson, he avoided the long-term injury. That's great news for him. You know, Ben Roethlisberger, he's reminded me a little bit of Drew Brees from last year. He just doesn't seem to have, he still has a little bit stronger of an arm, but like you don't have that over the top, that we are expecting with Chase Claypool, to get all those deep balls. Juju Smith-Schuster seems to be a guy that he loves across the middle right now. Deontay Johnson was a possession receiver that had some breakaway speed that he loved. So those are the two that I would like in the Steelers' backfield. Jarvis Landry, he's out for 2 to 3 weeks. We still don't really have an update on OBJ. He was supposed to be ready week 1. He didn't play. They ruled him out early week 2. Who's going to catch in Cleveland? That's some big questions. And then Amari Cooper went down late in the game with, I believe, a rib injury that he'll be evaluated. So again, not a huge week of, serious injuries, guys out for the year. There's a lot of nagging injuries that could have long season ramifications. Is there any guys that like scare you the most out of these injuries or I'm not wish you didn't happen is not the right way because we never wish an injury happened on anybody, but like, you know what I'm saying? Just answer my question.
Yeah, Cody, if I'm going to go with one of these 4 guys, it's probably going to be the guy you're least expecting me to pick, but I'm going with Jarvis Landry. I don't like that he's going to miss multiple weeks. I think Henderson's going to play. He might only miss a week. I think Deontay Johnson will play, maybe not this week, but I think he'll play soon. Amari Cooper, I believe it's just a bone bruise, so it'll be just a see how he feels kind of thing, see if it's a pain tolerance kind of injury. So I think he'll play. But Jarvis Landry, on a team that was already missing OBJ, he was actually really starting to get some good targets. And, even if Landry's not the biggest fantasy asset, if you watch a Browns game, they find ways to use him. Sometimes it's out of the backfield. Sometimes it's on the end around. Sometimes they throw it short to him. Sometimes they throw it deep to him. Sometimes they'll toss it back to him and let him throw it deep, and he'll actually get you some passing stats too. Jarvis Landry is a highly utilized guy in that offense, and he is a guy that after last week, I was starting to think he might be one of those guys you can slot into your offense every week and be happy in fantasy. He was going to get you those good, consistent points. And one of the biggest things with fantasy right now, my biggest pet peeves, isn't that we have a lack of talent in fantasy, it's that we have a lack of consistency. And we can even touch on that later. But there's so many guys that had a huge week 1 and then busted in week 2, or busted in week 1 and had a huge week 2. And having a guy that you can really just be confident to throw in and be like, look, he might only get me 10, but I know he's at least getting me 10. He's consistent. I can throw him in there, be fine. Landry's that guy. Landry's the guy where he might not put up the 30 big points that you want from some guys, but you can almost guarantee you he's getting at least 10, and he's going to have a consistently good day. So losing him is huge for fantasy.
It's a great point. I was actually debating Landry, but I'm glad you went into that tangent because I think I was going to go with this guy anyway, and that's Daryl Henderson. Not because, if he doesn't miss time, I don't think it's going to be a big deal, but I'm worried about if he does miss time because Sony Michel looked effective in his absence, and it's very rare that we've seen a Sean McVay offense not use a committee system. Henderson's been basically the lead back and not much of anything else. I'm worried if Michel gets carries and looks effective that this solid RB1 is going to turn into a committee because he's going to think he can't keep Michel off the field running that well.
Yeah, those are some great points. Definitely, as a Daryl Henderson owner in a few leagues, hoping that he gets back quickly. But if maybe you had an injury, you might need to know who to pick up on the waivers. So why don't we get into our waiver wire picks of the week?
Well, I'll start off with I posted a week 3 waiver wire article on the couchgms.com, so you can go check that out. I am going to mention somebody from that article here to start, but a lot of guys on here are not mentioned in that, so make sure you go check that out for a couple of bonus features here. I'm going to start off with Corduroy Patterson, somebody who I mentioned last week as well, saying he's getting a lot of production not only as a passer but as a receiver but as a runner, and that continued again, and this time it turned into 2 touchdowns this week. So I think he had 11 rushes and 7 targets in the passing game. How can you have somebody with that much volume in an offense only be 0.7% owned in the league? It's insane to me. I know he's not the flashiest name. He's never really gelled in an offense in the NFL, but Atlanta is committed to using him, and they are using him effectively.
And that
That's a great point,
one-handed
Coach.
touchdown he had was sick.
Oh, so sick.
So take that for what I mean. That has no fantasy relevance, but it was a web gem. I think that's a baseball highlight, but we're gonna call it an NFL highlight. That was a fantastic play. I'm gonna pivot off of your hybrid running back wide receiver to an actual running back, and that is maybe just for this week. But Peyton Barber, a name that he got cut from the football team. He got signed over in Las Vegas. Josh Jacobs was out in week 2, and we were like, oh, they signed Kenyon Drake in the offseason. That should be the guy that moves on. But nope, Peyton Barber is the running back in that league. It is, or for that team. It seems that Kenyon Drake has a passing down, receiving role that he fits in, and Josh Jacobs, and now with him out, Peyton Barber has filled. He did get 13 carries. Again, it wasn't great. It was only for 32 yards, but I talked about it last week. I'll talk about it again this week. Hamper your expectations for running backs against that Pittsburgh Steelers defense. If Josh Jacobs is out this week, Peyton Barber should be in your, at least consideration for your RB2 flex spots. He'll get the volume. And if might as well pick him up on Tuesday. If Josh Jacobs plays, cut him for another guy. You don't need to keep him if Josh Jacobs is back. But for the time being, pick up Peyton Barber.
Cody, I like it. Like you said, Peyton Barber might not have had a good week this week, but the big thing with fantasy is you can find receivers late in the year that just kind of emerge, but it's so hard to find a startable running back. So if you have a guy that you think might even be a decent pickup, go ahead and get him at running back because it's hard to fill in. And, speaking of receivers that you can just find random gems late in the year, I'm going to go with a guy. Now, this sounds crazy to me. There's a guy out there in the league that had 9 targets in week 1. He had 76 yards on those 9 targets and had 11.1 points. And we never even mentioned his name. Nobody mentioned his name, and he's still 0.3% owned. That guy then had 6 more targets in week 2, had 91 yards and a touchdown, putting up 18.6 points in a half-point PPR league. Sounds like a great guy, right? It's KJ Osborne, somebody that no one's talking about. And why is no one talking about KJ Osborne? Well, for obvious reasons. They have Adam Thielen and they have Justin Jefferson. So you think that the Vikings are going to be throwing to those two guys the most. However, you can say that those two guys make you scared to pick up somebody else, but it's hard to argue with 9 targets in week 1, 6 targets in week 2. He's obviously being utilized. Look, the Vikings lost Kyle Rudolph this offseason. He went to the Giants. So they don't really have that tight end that they are targeting really during the games. And they don't really have another receiver on the roster that they're targeting as much either. So it looks like they want 3 targets out there, and that third guy is KJ Osborne. And even as a third target, he is still putting up plenty of points for you to at least go consider picking him up as a bench receiver in case he does keep this up. Does he have bust potential with those two guys? Absolutely. You might have to play the matchups, but I think the Vikings are also going to be playing a lot more shootouts or playing from behind this year because I don't think they're that great of a team. So they're going to have to air the ball out more, and KJ Osborne is a guy that's going to get some of those targets. So there's a receiver you can go out and snag.
That's good advice there. I'm going to move back to the wide receiver room like you, and I'm going to go with a guy who is a little bit more owned. He's owned in 66% of leagues, but I think it should be more than that because he just secured 12 targets in week 2, and that's Michael Pittman. Now, I know we just talked about the whole Carson Wentz situation. He may miss a week. If he misses a week, you're not playing Pittman next week. But he's now shown that he has some rapport with Carson Wentz. He can be the wide receiver 1. He was dropped in a few leagues after week 1, even though he was drafted as a late round flyer a lot of places. That should go back up now. He should be owned in the 80s, 90% of leagues. He shouldn't be owned just in 66. So I get it. He might not be as widely available as some of the guys we're mentioning, but I just wanted to mention him. Like, don't forget about him. We talked about him a lot before the season. A lot of people jumped off the bandwagon too fast.
I definitely agree. I enjoyed seeing Michael Pittman put up some good fantasy numbers this week. I'm going to go for a real deep cut. Maybe you're in a 14-team league. Maybe you're in a 16-team league. Maybe you've just been decimated by injuries. But we just talked about how Jarvis Landry is going to be out for 2 to 3 weeks, and we don't know when Odell Beckham Jr. is going to come back. So I'm going to give you 2 guys. You can go with your gut on who you'd pick. I'll tell you which one I'm leaning towards. But that's Donovan Peoples-Jones and Rashard Higgins. Now, Rashard Higgins has been a waiver wire pickup for the last few years. Every time one of these guys has gotten hurt and has put up some decent numbers. Donovan Peoples-Jones was a rookie from last year who came on near the end of the season. For me, if you need a guy to start in week 3, you go with Rashard Higgins. If you want a little bit of wait and see, you have an extra bench spot, maybe someone that we mentioned ends up going on short-term IR and you can drop them in and pick them up, go for the flyer with Donovan Peoples-Jones. I think he's going to be more of a big play threat, boom or bust, where Rashard Higgins is going to be more consistently getting those targets across the middle. He might not have huge weeks, but he'll get it done. But Rashard Higgins plays very similar to how their 3 tight ends do that all see action too. So that's why I tend to lean Donovan Peoples-Jones. But sometimes you just got to go with old reliable in a guy like Rashard Higgins.
So, Cody, I'm going to ask you a question based off of what you just said. So, like you said, Jarvis Landry, Odell Beckham, both possibly out this upcoming week. Do you think that there's any uptick in the tight ends, Njoku, Austin Hooper, Harrison Bryant? And with that uptick, are any of them, addable or startable in the upcoming weeks with how weak the tight end position has been?
Yeah, I mean, I think, man, we talked about it off air before the start of the show. TJ Hawkinson, again, we're recording this Monday night before he played, is still sitting at tight end 4 in fantasy points at 20 after 2 weeks. And he had, so a lot of tight ends haven't even put up double digits consecutive weeks. If they're going to be across the middle, Austin Hooper or David Njoku was the guy week 1. Harrison Bryant, Austin Hooper were right there in targets in week 2. It's going to be hard to pinpoint which one it is. But again, that's another great point. If OBJ and Landry are out, take a stab at one of the tight ends. I mean, the way that they're looking, unless you have Waller, Kelsey, and Gronk, who cares? Just take a stab at it. Maybe one of those guys will catch on and be the receiver that you or the tight end that you need and surprise people and help you win a few weeks until those guys get back.
All right, Cody, that's a great point. So you know what? Now that we've mentioned some tight ends, we've gotten some running backs and receivers. I'm going to hit on the only other position other than kicker defense that we don't usually talk about that we haven't discussed yet, and that is quarterback. So which quarterback can you go out and add? Well, there's a couple mediocre quarterbacks that are actually looking a lot less mediocre. They're looking pretty great. We can start off with, I'll go ahead and say Jared Goff first. I haven't seen what he did against the Packers yet because that game hasn't happened yet.
He looked awful. What are you talking about?
Jared Goff? Are you kidding me?
No,
he put up
I think
many points.
I'm talking about against the Packers. I'm playing my bid again.
Oh, you mean when
he
put
probably
up 28 points against the Packers? Yeah, I mean,
that probably happened. I'm not going to lie.
That's going to go into the time machine, and we're going to see how that works out.
Look, guys, like I said, I haven't seen him against the Packers, and I know the Packers actually do have a good passing defense. We didn't see it in week 1, but they do.
The Packers even show up?
The Packers didn't show up in week 1. But they still have good corners. We know Jair Alexander is arguably the best corner in the league. He's right up there with Jalen Ramsey. So Goff might struggle in week 2, but even so, we do expect the Lions to suck this year. And if they do, they're going to be playing from behind a lot. They're going to have to air the ball out a lot. And even if it's garbage time points are still good. They still count for fantasy. Goff is still going to put up big points. You have Sam Darnold with his resurgence with the Carolina Panthers. Honestly looks great. Him and DJ Moore seem to have a really good connection. DJ Moore is seeing a huge uptick. He's a guy that you can go out and try to, hopefully you got in drafts, but Sam Darnold looks great. Another guy you can pick up. And finally, the last quarterback I'll hit on is Derek Carr. I've always been a doubter of Derek Carr. Even before this podcast, these guys can vouch for me. I have never said anything good about Derek Carr. I think the Raiders won't be good until they have someone better than Derek Carr. But you know what? They are 2-0 right now against 2 really good teams that were picked to even compete for Super Bowls. And the dude is just airing it out. Even if he's not making the best throws, he is still laying that ball out there. Henry Ruggs is catching the deep balls. And believe it or not Patrick Mahomes, not Aaron Rodgers, obviously he hasn't played yet, but the leader in passing yards in the NFL as of right now is Derek Carr by a decent margin for week 2. So he's a guy you can go out there and get, guys. He should still be available in most leagues. He's only, I think, 24% owned. Go out and get yourself a mediocre quarterback, guys. It might just work out for you.
Well, just so we all know, Aaron Rodgers would have to throw almost 700 yards on Monday night after his bad performance to catch up to Derek Carr. So I don't think I think he's safe. I do want to point out, because you mentioned that how much you have disliked Derek Carr. Devontae Adams was, trashing on. They were college quarterback wide receivers, so they're friends. But he was trashing on Derek Carr letting his hair grow out a little bit in his press conference this past week. So I was like, man, I bet Tyler would love this if he heard it. And I forgot to send it to you, so I apologize. But yeah,
I
great.
honestly just haven't liked Derek Carr for years, not even because of the way he plays, but because of the way he looks. And it's just because he looks like Sid from Toy Story. Pull up a picture. I'm telling you, it's uncanny how much they look alike. And this dude was murdering poor innocent toys in Toy Story. So I just can't get behind a quarterback that looks like that. Even though Derek Carr is actually one of the nicest guys in real life, in my head, he's killing innocent toys. So that's why I don't like Derek Carr.
Hey.
Well, before we destroy everybody's childhood here, I think we have one more segment to hit for everybody. So why don't we get into some buy, sell, and hold?
Absolutely, guys. And if you're not sure what this means, basically, we're going to name off some guys. And once we say them, we're going to say if we're going to buy them, sell them, and hold them. Give a little bit of an explanation. Buy means maybe you want to go out and trade for them. Maybe you want to pick them up off free agency, or maybe you're just buying into the hype. Hold means you could hold them on your roster. You could hold off on trading for them. You could just hold off on the player altogether. Or sell could mean, hey, maybe you're cutting this guy. Maybe you're trading this guy away. Or maybe you just are getting him out of your fantasy mind and you don't even want to pretend like he's a person the rest of the year. But George, why don't you go ahead and start us off with our first guy?
All right, first guy on the board, we have Tom Brady. So obviously Tom Brady is going to be owned in a lot of leagues. So I'm either talking trade away, trade for, or hold. I am in sell mode with Tom Brady, just mostly because he has now set a personal record for touchdown passes in the first 2 weeks of his career. And this guy's got a long career, a long successful career, and even he's breaking his own personal records. So I'm not saying Tom Brady's going to be bad the rest of the season. No, Tom Brady's probably going to be a serviceable quarterback most weeks for you. But this is probably the highest value you're going to see him at the entire season. He's not going to go out there and throw 4 touchdown passes every single week. So if you have somebody who's quarterback desperate and actually wants Tom Brady, sell him. If you have to hold him, it's not the worst thing in the world, but give it a little look. Put some feelers out there. See if anyone's interested.
Yeah, that's a great point, George. I'll go ahead and move on to our next guy because it's somebody that I just talked about, and that is Derek Carr. And I am obviously in buy mode. I think that this guy should be cheap. If you are a little weak at quarterback, then, or maybe you had one of the quarterbacks that got injured, he's a guy that you should be able to go out and trade for pretty cheap, despite putting up 2 good weeks in a row. But odds are he's out there on free agency. Feel free to use a waiver claim on him and go get Derek Carr. Even if he's not your starting quarterback, he should be a more than serviceable backup if your starter goes down or if you need a bye week fill.
Yeah, you just talked about it. Those are some great points on Derek Carr. I'm going to pivot us to the running back position. And the first guy, man, he's stormed onto the scene, even with a first round pick ahead of him, and that's running back Tony Pollard for the Dallas Cowboys, sitting currently at running back number 9. I mean, this one is tough for me because he looked so well. He's definitely a feature part of the offense. You don't have to worry about it. What you should do with him is a different question. For me personally, I'm holding him. I'm not going out to make trades for him. I'm not trying to trade him. I'm going to use him as an asset for my team. They're using him very similar to how Kareem Hunt has startable value even with Nick Chubb there. Tony Pollard has startable value with Kareem Hunt there. Now, if you're in a league with like the biggest Dallas fan in the world, yeah, go trade him. I feel like that's granted for every person we're going to talk about. If there's a guy out there that's sending you ridiculous offers or has bought fully in, don't be afraid to move Tony Pollard. But for me, I'm holding on to him right now, and I'm going to take advantage of a very late round draft pick that is doing wonders for my fantasy team through the first 2 weeks.
Good advice there, Cody. I'm going to keep us in the running back position with Ravens running back Tyson Williams. Very interesting case here. I kind of hate that you guys stuck me with this one because I am just going to think on the spot here of what I'm going to do. So he is in a committee, but he's in a committee that is the most run-heavy offense in the league. And I think he's actually looked the most impressive of the group. The only thing I'm worried about with him is losing goal line touches to Latavius Murray, because Latavius Murray has been great inside the 10 so far in the first 2 weeks. With that being said, with him being the biggest threat to break a long play in that offense right now, on a team that's going to consistently run for 200 yards a game probably, I'm going to hold him. I don't think he's built up enough value to sell him yet. And if I have him, I'm holding him. If he's a free agent for some reason, pick him up, but don't go trading for him yet either. It's too many question marks for you to buy unless it's just buying off the waiver wire. Just hold on to him for right now.
All right, I guess it's my turn, and I'm going to go with another running back. And we have running back Myles Gaskin for the Dolphins. Now, look, this is a guy you drafted relatively high up, expecting big things. He only had 9 carries in week 1. He only had 5 carries in week 2, and his highest point total was 10. He's very disappointing right now, so obviously we should sell him, right? Wrong. I am saying buy him. I am saying go out and grab him. Look, he played the Buffalo Bills and the New England Patriots, 2 of the best run defenses in the league. So, of course, he's not going to look great in the first 2 weeks. Is it frustrating that he's not getting more carries? Absolutely. But he is getting 5 targets a game. He caught all 5 passes. One of the 2 games, he caught all 4 of the 5. In the second game, and he plays the 20th ranked defense in the Raiders. Then he has the Colts, which is tough, but then he faces the 21st ranked defense in the Bucks, the 23rd ranked defense in the Jags, the 19th ranked defense in Atlanta. Now, granted, the Bucks are still a tough run defense, so tamper expectations there. But even for the rest of the year, he has a relatively easier schedule against run defenses. This guy should have a huge uptick from here on out. And right now, whoever owns Gaskin is probably pretty low on him and frustrated. You should be able to go out and trade for him cheaper, unless you have a guy like Cody in your league who loves Gaskin and still won't move him cheap. Then you're probably still not getting him. But look, this is a guy that I would go out and grab if I could. Only for the right price, though.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I am definitely on team buy if you can on Myles Gaskins. I love that dude. It probably will cost me some like fantasy games because I'm too bullish to not start him against bad matchups. But I'm going to pivot to the wide receivers. I'm going to switch positions here again. And we're going to start it off with wide receiver DJ Moore. Again, we talked about it with Sam Darnold when he brought up quarterbacks that have looked good. He is averaging over 10 fantasy points a game. It's been a little bit of surprising that Robbie Anderson hasn't looked as well as he has. We expected their connection to pick off where it left off in New York, but it seems that DJ Moore is the guy. Now, again, this is another very tough case for me to actually decide on what to do with him. If I own him, I am trying to move him. But if I don't own him, he's not a guy that I'm like going out to must trade for. So I guess it depends on where. If you own him, you're trying to sell him. If you don't own him, maybe you want to hold on him. Expect some offers from a guy like DJ Moore, especially after his big week in week 2. Not saying he can't do it. Owners, maybe don't sell him this week. They have the Houston Texans on a short week. Like, he has some value after the Thursday night game to maybe flip him for even something better. So hold him this week. Hope for a big game. Look to sell him next week, because I do think eventually Robbie Anderson will start to eat into those receptions. They'll get back to that. And then they still have Christian McCaffrey there. The dude just puts up points. He has so many catches a game. There's just not enough targets to essentially go around. So I like DJ Moore this week. Sell him next week. But that's a good one. DJ Moore.
Okay, another interesting wide receiver here, and I like that I ended up with this one because Cody says I get him every year. Tyler Lockett. I always have to start off with, is it a DK week or a Lockett week? But this one's tough, and hear me out. So normally when that's the case, you'll see like DK gets 4 targets and Lockett gets 10, just because that's how the game plan went, or that's how the defense kind of shook out their coverage. Lockett had 2 straight good weeks in a row, and Lockett and DK are actually tied for the team lead with 16 targets each through the first 2 weeks. I'm not saying DK's busting, but Lockett may be slightly more consistent this year than he was last year. With that being said, he's not going to get 20 to 24 points every week. I'm probably selling him because if he was doing 15 points every week, I think then I would say hold, but you're going to get crazy value, and he's going to have a little bit more of a modest point total most weeks, even if he is more consistent. You're going to get more value than he's worth, so sell, but I'm leaning a little towards hold.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, George, it's really inconsistency that makes him a little less valuable, but at the same time, he has that speed that even if he's sitting at like 2 points for the game in the fourth quarter, he is one big play away from breaking it and getting that touchdown at any time. So it's kind of hard to sell on him, but I completely understand what you're getting at there. So, guys, my next guy is Marquis Brown, the wide receiver for the Ravens. Now, I think Marquis Brown is really impressive this year. I think that he's really not. He's supposed to be amazing when he was drafted. He was supposed to be one of the top receivers in the league, and he's been super disappointing. And I think that this is the first time that he has really come alive, and he has really, shown the potential that he's supposed to be. And I think that he only has room for improvement. But I'm going to say sell because, look, they have receivers that are currently on their IR that are planning on coming back even in the short term, especially big rookie Rashad Bateman, who is one of the top looking guys on that team at receiver. He might be the number one when he comes back and gets a rhythm with Lamar Jackson. So right now, I think he's only going to get better, but I think he's going to end up losing targets down the road. Especially on a team where, look, I'll be the first one to admit that Lamar does look better to me this year than I expected. I still don't think he looks great. He's still making some dumb decisions, but look, Lamar is still a mobile quarterback, and they've proven it so many times in that game that if it means Lamar running for a first down or Lamar throwing for the first down, they will choose run 9 out of 10 times. And with that being said, you always have to be cautious that receivers that normally would get more targets in a game in big situations, he's not going to get those because of Lamar running the ball. So I would sell on Marquis Brown while he has some value, while he is starting to shine a little bit. See if there's a Ravens fan out there, or see if there's someone who wants to buy into that young receiver's potential and sell him.
Those are some great points there. It appears we're having some technical difficulty, and my face is frozen. So if you want to see whatever face that I'm stuck on, head over to our YouTube channel. But my last guy I'm going to talk about is tight end George Kittle, drafted in the 3rd round. You know, often considered a part of the big three. And I'm going to say sell George Kittle. Why? Because of his name. It's you're going to get some value for him. He's putting up average points with other tight ends. You know, if you could package him for like a Noah Fant and another wide receiver or running back, if you could package him for even a Logan Thomas, because of his name value, go out and get. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying you must go out and trade George Kittle, but take his name and use it as an advantage to improve your team. Go out and use him as a part of a 2-for-1. Like I said, make sure you get a tight end back that you don't have to get a tight end back if you picked up George Kittle and then grab Gronk at the very end of you're like, I'll just roll with Gronk. Hey, now you can go get maybe a top running back with George Kittle. Like, work your league, work your magic. George Kittle is definitely in the sell category for me. He has potential. I mean, you might trade him and then in a few weeks regret that trade for a week or two. But with all the injuries that we're seeing to the running backs in San Fran, with Jimmy G still there, not knowing when Trey Lance is getting on the field, expecting Trey Lance to have more of a running first offense. George Kittle, while I thought coming into the season he was one of my favorite tight ends, he was going to get all the targets. It just hasn't happened that way. Debo has been a guy across the middle. getting a lot more targets, outleading George Kittle. So again, not saying you have to go out and trade George Kittle, but use that name value to your advantage. And maybe now is the time to swing for a big name guy that you might be able to pull in, because tight ends are so bad that people will be like, ooh, a solid tight end, I don't have to worry about it. But at the same time, he's all the way down at tight end 12 with 9.5 fantasy points on the season. George Kittle, your third round pick, has 9.5 fantasy points on the season. Might make you think on how valuable a tight end really is, unless you got Travis Kelce with 36.5 or something like that. But George Kittle, go out and make a move with him.
I love the fact that you said the reason I'm selling George Kittle is because of his name. You set yourself up perfectly for I don't want anybody named George because George sucks. You set yourself up perfectly for a George diss, and you totally just blew it. So I'm a little disappointed in you. But we're
I'm
going to go
sorry.
ahead and
Please
move
forgive
on.
me.
I'll forgive you this time, but next week, don't let it happen again. We got to tear George down. That's our goal here. We're going to, guys, just as a reminder, we are recording this Monday before the Monday Night Football game, and our next episode we will record Thursday before the Thursday Night Football game. Our next episode is going to be a preview for the week on fantasy players, but since we're recording it before the Thursday night game, we're not going to have a chance to talk about it. So we are going to go ahead and preview Thursday night's game here real quick before we finish it up. Just a quick one because it's not a huge game with not a lot of players in it that you're going to be playing. We have the Carolina Panthers and the Houston Texans. What a horrible matchup for Thursday Night Football, as usual. On the Panthers side, you got DJ Moore, you got Christian McCaffrey. On the Texans side, you got pretty much nothing. Is there really anybody else that you guys want to mention here? Anybody else you should be looking at possibly starting?
With quarterback injuries, if you're worried about somebody or somebody might not play, I would think about a Sam Darnold as a potential streamer this week. I know Houston shut a team down in week 1, but I think the more likely scenario is Houston gives up a lot of points, and if they're going to be in a game, it's because their offense is going to put up as many points to match it. But I still don't believe that defense is that solid. I think Sam Darnold could be a solid streamer at quarterback.
Yeah, I do like streaming Sam Darnold this week against Houston. We talked about it with all their injuries. We didn't really like too many of their options. Uh, Again, if you absolutely need someone, Brandon Cook just gets volume. I mean, he's not flashy, but he could probably start your week out with a solid, 8 to 12 points, which might be a good start for you. Um, if you do play him, make sure you put him in a wide receiver spot and not in a flex. I'm going to remind you of that every week when we do one of these. Get your Thursday night players out of your flex spot. You want to put them in an actual roster in case something comes up. You never know what's going to happen before the game time. But my biggest question mark is Robbie Anderson. I know he has the talent, he has the potential. We haven't seen that much out of him. Is this the week he bounces back? Is it's a poor matchup, or because of the Texans injury, are we just expecting this to be a game that's like over by halftime and then it's all um his name's not Chuba Hubbard, but that's what I call him. So is it gonna be a breakout game for him? But like Robbie Anderson's the biggest question mark for me, and I guess as a Robbie Anderson owner, I'm trying to get you guys to answer my question for me.
Look, Robbie Anderson, I don't think I'm actually going to start him personally. I still think I'm a little I think he's a good player. I just don't think he has the connection with Sam Darnold yet. I think that's the issue. And more I'm seeing that connection is really a big key factor with players more than their talent. Cuz like we saw Julio Jones in week 1 with the Titans. I use them because, that's the game that I watched the most, obviously. Julio Jones and Ryan Tannehill just were not on the same page. And because of it, Tannehill and Julio couldn't hook up. They really didn't get anything at all. And they worked on it a lot in practice this week, really wanted to try to get on the same page. And we saw Julio break out with over 100 yards receiving in week 2. I don't think Robbie Anderson's has that connection yet. So I would avoid him for now until I saw him get a better connection with Darnold. So hopefully that answers your question. The only other person I do want to mention, or persons I should say, is if you are looking at defenses streaming this year, the Panthers defense does actually look really good. And they are playing against the Houston Texans, who might be starting a quarterback that his first pass was an interception. So remember that. Or it wasn't him. But Davis Mills really doesn't look great, right? He doesn't look like he's ready yet to start. And really, the whole Texans offense looks like it could be even worse this week than what they have been these past 2 weeks. So the Panthers defense could be a pretty good streaming option for this week if you need a defense.
Really quick, just to throw something out there because everyone's always looking for streamer tight ends. Dan Arnold this week, he had 3 for 55 in week 2. It looks like he's really connecting with Sam Darnold. Would you stream him against Houston?
Would I stream Dan the Man Arnold? I probably wouldn't. Like, if I'm going to stream a guy, like, I'm going to go get one of those Cleveland tight ends this week, like an Austin Hooper or Harrison Bryant. With those injuries, those are the guys I'm going to target first. I also don't like having a lot of players play on Thursday night. I feel like if they have a bad game, it just like makes until Sunday even more depressing. So that's like a personal reason. Like I try to avoid Thursday night matchups if I can. And again, Dan Arnold is like option 4 on that team behind high volume Christian McCaffrey, appears to be high volume DJ Moore, and big play Robbie Anderson. So for me, no, not. I like the thought, but I need more consistency out of Dan Arnold. But you're probably not going to get that at the tight end position unless your name is Travis Kelce. Heck, even Darren Waller had under 10 points. Like this position is so bad. You know, I'm always saying cut kickers out of fantasy football. I'm this close. My camera's frozen. I'm making hand gestures. This close to saying let's get rid of tight ends because it's miserable out there when, you know, a tight end you think is going to, you know, put up 5 points gets 0, gets 1.5. But that's what we have to deal with. And hopefully as the weeks progress, we have a better feeling on who tight ends 5 through 12 end up being, who could be a little bit more reliable. And we'll talk about tight ends that you might want to play in our next episode. But for now, I got to go watch some Packers football. I mean, the Packers played so well on yesterday. I already know the score. But as always, thanks for listening to another episode of the Couch GMs podcast.
Absolutely, guys. And, you know, I should really just ramble here for as long as I possibly can to make Cody miss Packers football, but I'm not going to. I'm going to be a nice guy because I would hate it if it was
his camera's frozen, so he can walk away and we wouldn't even know.
Yeah, that's
Am I
completely
even
fair.
here?
Yes, you're still there. But guys, anyway, listen, you can definitely get involved with this podcast. We are not just 3 friends and everybody else is just listening to us. We want to hear from you. We want to hear, you know, maybe you need some fantasy advice. Maybe you think we're total idiots for something we said on the podcast, mostly something George said. That's totally fine. Let us know, comment, post, ask us questions, whatever you want to do. And like I said, I'm not afraid to bring some fans on here for an episode sometime this year. So reach out to us and maybe we'll invite you on for later in the season. Either way, this podcast is a lot more fun for us and a lot more fun for you when you get involved.
Yes, thank you one more time for listening in to the Couch GMs podcast. We'll be back later this week to break down all the other games in week 3. And be sure to check out thecouchgms.com for all our bonus content. Thank you one more time for Tyler Snyder and Cody Roadcap. I'm George Kerth, and we'll see you all later in the week.